Hello YouTube. This video is about gauges. You may recognize these gauges from having seen them bolted onto the core support for the vehicle, and we use them for test running the engine, and they're nice big gauges. I like them, so I've ordered another set to put in the car. The reason I'm not using this set of gauges is there's an ignition on-off switch on it and a starter button, which I won't have on the gauges in the vehicle. NHRA doesn't like these plastic oil sending unit pipes. They want a stainless steel braided line, and I've bought a kit from Autometer that I purchased from Summit that has all the fittings necessary to plumb the oil pressure gauge with the stainless steel line. My understanding is there's two places to pick up oil pressure from on a Gen 5 454. One is right here, and the other is above the oil filter right here. This might be a better spot to pick my oil pressure from because it's not as close to the firewall. In order to thread this one on, once the motor is in, it's a blind thread because you can't see it. But I think I'm going to go ahead and put it here and see how I like it. And if I don't like it, in the future I'll move it down here. So let's take this one out. By the way, I don't know if I mentioned it, but the reason I'm going with stainless steel line is that NHRA requires it. So we've removed that fitting and we'll save it for a future test engine. Let's open this kit up and see if it really provides everything that we need. There's the fitting for the block, I believe. Not sure what that fitting's for. That's the fitting that screws into the block fitting. There's a grommet for going through the firewall. And this screws on to the fitting that goes into the block. So this fitting must be the fitting that goes into the gauge. Like so. We'll have to get the gauge and see if that works. And take the hose off the back of the gauge. Take the fitting off the back of the gauge. And try this fitting on the back of the gauge. And that works. Now those are all pipe threads, so we'll have to put sealant on it. So I think it'll work. What we need to do is install the pieces onto the motor and then put the motor back into the car. We'll put a little bit of sealant on this pipe fitting. Wipe off the mess I made and tighten it down. There we go. Do the same thing with the AN fitting and tighten it down. Then the stainless steel braided line screws onto this. Now this is an AN fitting with a tapered end. So the tapered end is the seal. So no sealant on that. And I think I can put that on blind. It screws on fairly easy. So it should be all right. But I'm not going to leave it on while I'm putting the motor in the car. So I'll take it back off. And we'll put the motor back into the car. Actually, we'll put the engine back into the car. That's the correct term for it. To keep any dirt from getting in there, we'll put the cap back on it while we're putting it back in the car. Now let's see if I can put the line on. You gotta do this by feel. Let's see, where is it? Oh, the cap is on there. Take the cap off. And spread the line on. Now let's see if we can put an Allen wrench on that. We sure can. There we go. It's tight. Now we have to decide where we're going to route this line. They sell this line in lengths of 3, 4, and 6 feet. I got the 4 foot, but I think that's going to be awful long. These are crimped on fittings, so I can't change it. There's a lot to hook up here so that we can test run it with a new line on it, but I'll bring you back when I'm there. What we need is a place to mount the gauges. Now, I can mount them like this, but it's not really visible to the driver, not that the driver's going to be looking at it going down a track. I think I'm going to tilt them like that. I kind of want to put them here, but the hole's not big enough and I really don't want to cut the dash. So I think the best spot is right here, and we'll tilt it up. And again, it's not something the driver's going to be looking at going down the track. It's more for in the pits. So I think it'll be all right here. So we're going to have to modify the gauge holder to tilt it like this, but we can do that. Seems like we start all our projects by disassembling the project. And I guess this is going to be no different. We'll take all the gauges out so we don't damage them. This is the temperature gauge, and it has the tube that we don't want to get damaged. So we'll take it apart carefully. Probably going to change the order that these gauges are in too. I put oil pressure, water temperature, and then volts. Volts really isn't that important. What I don't want to do is bend the face of this so the gauges don't sit in squarely, but I think if I work this way and work slowly, maybe I can bend it the way we want it. Let's see what that looks like. We did bend the face. Let's see if we can take some of the bend out of the face. It's not all gone. It's better. What I've done is clamp the face plate in place with a C-clamp and placed the gauges in the faceplate and sat in the driver's seat to make sure that you can see them all. It's not exactly in the center because if I put it in the center you can't see this gauge because of the steering wheel. So this is an example of function over form. Although it's not in the center of the dash, it is in a position where the driver can see the gauges should he have to. Now what we can do is remove the gauges and mark the holes that we need to drill to mount the faceplate. Here we are marking the locations of the holes. I'm sure everybody's done this at one point. Well, you might as well be comfortable while you're drilling. One more to go. And that's firmly mounted. Now what we need to do is take it back out and wire it up. First thing we'll do is put a little sealant on the pipe threads that are coming out of the back of the oil pressure gauge. We don't want oil leaking into the cabin of the vehicle, that's for sure. Then clean up my mess. And screw the AN fitting on. And tighten it down. I've changed the order of the gauges again. We're going to have water temperature, volts, oil pressure. The reason the voltmeter goes in the center is because the wires for the lights are only long enough to reach the volt gauge if it's in the center. What we've done is hooked all the negatives and the positives together of the instrument lights. And we did that so that we can put them on the back of the volt gauge, and now we need to solder them. To solder them, I'm going to take them out of the gauges and take it over to my soldering station. A little drop of solder and some heat. Now we need to make the leads for the volt gauge. So we'll strip back the ends of the wire. Take a connector that's had the insulation stripped off and insert the wire into it and crimp it. The reason I'm using yellow is because that's the color that I used in the car for the lights. And we'll solder that. We'll take some heat shrink and slide it down over the connector and shrink it down. What I want to do is drill only one hole in the firewall for the stainless steel oil pressure line and the capillary tube for the temperature gauge. So let's try to drill out the center of this grommet a little bit. I think that might be good enough. We'll leave it like that, and if it needs to go bigger, we'll make it bigger. Now for the painful decision of where to drill the hole. I think I'm going to drill it right here. That way the tube can go right in. I'm not up here. The engine hoist goes right here, so I can't put it up here. I don't want it over here because I have the transmission dipstick on that side. So I think we'll go right here. We need a 7/8 hole for the size of the grommet, right about there. Now we have to find our punch mark. It's right there. Now we need to drill a 7/8 hole. Broke that drill right off. There we go. I've split the grommet so that I can get the end of the capillary tube through the grommet. Let's see if it fits. There we go, it fits. Now we got to take it back out again. We have the gauge bezel in place and the gauges installed, and we've run the capillary tubing through the hole, and it's plenty long to reach our fitting in the intake manifold. We'll tighten up the heat sensor for the capillary tube for the water temperature sensor. There's no sealant required here because it has a flared fitting. I've run both the capillary tubing and the stainless steel line through our hole, and I'm going to take our split grommet and put it around both the capillary tubing and the stainless steel line and try to fit it into the hole. There we go. I think we got it. Now we go inside and hook up the gauges. As you can see, we have lots of capillary tubing here, and we have lots of oil line. I should have got the 3-foot rather than the 4-foot. We'll get an Allen wrench and tighten that up. Okay, that's tight. I turned the gauge. Well, if I turned it one way, I should be able to turn it the other way. There we go. Now we got to figure out what to do with all this excess line. Set it up on top of the firewall. That's what we'll do with it. Now we have to install the instrument lights. What I should have done before I put them in was mark which one was positive, which one was negative, and I didn't. So now I'm going to have to try to see it in a mirror. Okay, the terminal near the driver is positive. Now we'll tighten everything up. I think what we'll do is put a clamp here on the firewall to hold the oil pressure line and the capillary tube for the temperature sensor right about there. Alright, so that'll hold the lines up nicely. I think that'll be an excellent ground for our voltage gauge. So we'll get the ground wire and we'll figure out how long we should make that. I think that's good right there. So we'll cut it off right there, put a connection on the end and crimp it, and of course solder it. There we go. And put the ground lead for our voltage gauge underneath it and screw it back in. And we've killed two birds with one stone. We've got a clamp for our oil line and for the capillary tube for the temperature sensor and a ground for our voltage gauge. Now all we got to do is hook up the positive side. This yellow wire here is the wire for the light inside of the tachometer, and we'll tap into that and try to solder that. Okay, we got a good solder joint. Slide some heat shrink tubing over the connection and shrink it down. And now the gauges should work. So we're going to have to start the motor up and see. Okay, it's time to see what we've got. We'll turn on the ignition and the gauges light up. That's a good sign. We'll turn the water pump on and we'll turn the fuel pump on, and we'll start it and see if we get oil pressure. As you can see, the temperature gauge has started to rise, and if we turn the fan on and the water pump on, it should drop fairly quickly. So now it's below 150, so it is dropping. The temperature gauge works. I'm checking for oil leaks down on our connection here, and we don't have any. I think we accomplished what we set out to do. If you like this video, there'll be more.